Most people do not fail at change because they lack willpower. They fail because they misunderstand how change actually works. They begin with great energy, make large promises, follow strict plans, and then, within weeks, sometimes days, they return to the same patterns they were trying to leave behind. Each failure adds weight to a quiet belief that slowly hardens into certainty. The belief that they are simply not the kind of person who changes. This story is about why that belief forms and why it is almost always wrong. It is a story about how lasting change actually happens, not through intensity or perfect discipline, but through small, honest actions repeated patiently, supported by a way of thinking that most people in the modern world have forgotten. Kenji was 43 years old when the moment arrived that he could no longer ignore. He was not in a hospital. There was no dramatic crisis. He was standing in his own kitchen on a Tuesday evening, reaching for a glass on the second shelf, when his arm trembled. The glass slipped. It did not break, but Kenji stood very still for a long time after that, looking at his hand. He was a carpenter by trade. His hands had always been his strength. They had built furniture, repaired homes, and carried the weight of his family for 20 years. Now they were trembling, reaching for a glass. That night, after his wife and children had gone to sleep, Kenji sat at the kitchen table alone. He thought about the last several years, the late nights eating whatever was nearby, the cigarettes that had become an hourly ritual, the heaviness in his chest that he had learned to ignore, the weekends that passed in exhaustion rather than rest. He thought about his son Daichi, who was 11 years old and had recently stopped asking his father to play football in the garden. Kenji had not noticed exactly when the asking stopped, but sitting alone in his kitchen that night, he noticed the absence. He cried quietly so that no one would hear him. Kenji's life, seen from the outside, appeared full and functional. He worked steadily, paid his bills, loved his family, and carried his obligations without complaint. But somewhere inside that full and functional life, the man himself had been quietly disappearing. His habits had not formed through laziness. They had formed through years of small surrenders, a skipped meal replaced by convenience, an early morning sacrificed for one more hour of rest, a cigarette taken not for pleasure, but simply because the day felt too heavy without it. His body had sent signals for years. Breathlessness after short climbs, fatigue that sleep never fully resolved, a cough that arrived every winter and stayed longer each time, blood reports that his doctor reviewed with an expression that Kenji had learned to read and then immediately choose to forget. He had tried to change before. 3 separate gym memberships, 2 different diets followed with complete seriousness for exactly 11 days each. A running schedule that lasted one cold morning before the warmth of his bed proved more persuasive. Each failed attempt left a mark, not on his body, but on his belief in himself. By the time he was sitting alone in his kitchen, looking at his trembling hand, Kenji had quietly accepted that this was simply the shape his life had taken. Some people changed. He was not one of them. 2 weeks after the kitchen incident, a colleague named Mori mentioned a doctor he had been seeing. Not a specialist, not a therapist, simply a general physician who, Mori said, approached things differently. Kenji made an appointment with little expectation. Dr. Yamane was a small, unhurried woman in her 60s who listened to Kenji describe his weight, his smoking, his fatigue, his failed attempts, and his deepening sense of shame without taking a single note. When he finished, she did not offer a plan. She asked a question. How long did it take you to become who you are right now? Kenji thought about it honestly. 43 years, he said. Dr. Yamane nodded. Then she explained something that Kenji had never considered. He had spent decades building the habits he now carried. Yet every time he tried to change them, he allowed himself 2 weeks, perhaps a month, before deciding that change was not working. This mismatch between the time it took to build a pattern and the time he allowed to change it was not a personal failure. It was simply an impossible equation. Then she gave him his first instruction. Every morning after waking, drink 1 full glass of water before doing anything else. Kenji waited for the rest of the plan. There was no rest. He left the appointment feeling vaguely cheated. He had described decades of deteriorating health and been told to drink water, but he did it. For the first 2 weeks, nothing changed visibly. His weight remained the same. His cough did not disappear. His cigarette habit continued unchanged. But on the mornings when he forgot the water, twice in 14 days, he noticed something unexpected, a faint, unsettled feeling, as if a small promise had been broken without ceremony. When he returned to Dr. Yamane, she explained what had actually happened. The water itself was almost irrelevant. What mattered was that Kenji had made a commitment to himself and kept it every day for 2 weeks. This was the first principle, Kaizen. Small improvement practiced consistently, not dramatic transformation, not visible results in 2 weeks, simply the daily practice of keeping one small promise to yourself until the keeping of it becomes part of who you are. Kenji had not changed his body, but he had begun, very quietly, to change his relationship with himself. The second step arrived gradually. Dr. Yamane introduced an idea from traditional Japanese eating culture, Hara Hachi Bu, eating until 80% full, rather than until completely satisfied. Not restriction, not counting or measuring, simply pausing mid-meal, waiting, and paying attention to what the body actually needed, rather than what habit or comfort was demanding. Kenji found this more difficult than the water. Food had become emotional territory. The cigarettes had become a rhythm so deep it felt like breathing. But he practiced the pause, not perfectly, not every time, but more often than before. The scale moved slowly. Some weeks it did not move at all, but something more important was changing. Kenji was beginning to feel like a participant in his own life, rather than a passenger. Movement entered his days in the most modest possible form. Dr. Yamane did not prescribe exercise. She suggested that Kenji walk to the end of his street and back each morning. That was all. The distance was approximately 200 meters. Kenji felt slightly foolish the first morning. He was a grown man walking to the end of a street and returning. His neighbors could see him. He completed the walk in under 4 minutes, but he went the next morning and the morning after. After 10 days, his son Daichi asked where he was going. Kenji said he was just walking. Daichi asked if he could come. They walked together. The walks grew longer without Kenji deciding to make them longer. One morning they reached the small park at the far end of the neighborhood. Daichi asked if they could play football for a few minutes. They played for 40 minutes. Several weeks later, Dr. Yamane asked Kenji a question that caught him without a prepared answer. Why do you actually want to change? Not what you think you should say. The real reason. Kenji sat with the question for a long moment. He realized that losing weight had never been the real reason. The real reason was standing at the edge of that park, watching his son run and being able to follow. It was being present as his children grew, rather than watching their childhood from a chair. It was being someone his family could lean on, rather than worry about. This was Ikigai, not a grand purpose discovered through meditation, simply an honest understanding of why the effort was worth it, specific enough to return to on the days when motivation faded. Ikigai gave his habits weight and direction. Without it, the water and the walking were just tasks. With it, they were expressions of something that mattered deeply. 4 months into his quiet practice, Kenji stumbled. A family gathering brought food and old rhythms. He ate more than he had in months. He smoked more than he had in weeks. The following morning, he woke with the familiar feeling of having undone everything. He considered calling Dr. Yamane to say that it had not worked, that he had proven, once again, that he was not the kind of person who changed. He called her. She listened. Then she said something simple. One difficult evening does not erase 4 months of daily effort. The path is still there. You simply need to return to it. This was Wabi Sabi, the Japanese understanding that nothing is perfect, nothing is permanent, and nothing is ever completely finished. Imperfection is not failure. It is simply the honest texture of real effort over real time. Kenji returned to his habits the next morning. Water, a mindful portion at breakfast, a walk with Daichi. The stumble had not erased anything. It had simply been a stumble. Around this time, Dr. Yamane introduced the final practice. Each morning, Kenji wrote down 3 things he felt grateful for. Nothing grand. A quiet morning before the house woke up. A meal shared without rushing. A moment in the park when Daichi laughed. Each evening, he wrote 1 sentence about what the day had taught him. At first, this felt like an assignment he had not asked for. But within weeks, Kenji noticed something shifting in how he moved through his days. His mind spent less time cataloging what was wrong and missing. His attention returned more naturally to what was already present and real. Gratitude did not make his life easier. It made it clearer. And clarity, he discovered, made discipline feel lighter. When he knew why he was doing something, doing it required less effort. The journal became the anchor that held everything else in place. A year passed. Kenji's body had changed, steadily, undramatically, reliably. His weight had reduced, his cough had lessened, his blood reports showed improvement for the first time in 8 years. He had reduced his smoking to occasional moments, rather than hourly ritual. But the changes that mattered most were quieter than any of that. He was present, he was participating, he was someone his children sought out, rather than worked around. One evening, Daichi asked him to come outside and play. Kenji went without thinking about whether he had the energy. They played until it was dark. When they came inside, his wife looked at them both and said nothing. But she smiled in a way that Kenji recognized as meaning something important. Kenji had not transformed through intensity or perfect discipline. He had changed through something far more durable. Small, honest actions, repeated with patience, held together by a clear understanding of why they mattered. The habits he had carried for decades had not disappeared through force. They had gradually been replaced by new patterns that fit more naturally into who he was becoming. This is how lasting change actually works. Not through a single dramatic decision, not through the perfect plan followed without fault, but through the daily practice of keeping small promises to yourself, imperfectly, patiently, and for long enough that the keeping of them becomes simply who you are. If something in this story feels familiar, consider this quietly. What is the smallest promise you could make to yourself today and actually keep? Change rarely arrives through intensity. It arrives through honesty, patience, and time. Thank you for watching.